Welcome everybody to our Latinx in tech, where it started, where it's going. We're going to spend the next hour sharing together. We have an amazing panel of accomplished Latinos from all different backgrounds. They're going to share their perspectives on, what the last 30 years have been like for Latinx in tech, but then also what does it look like going forward, right? And I know from attendees, we have people from, from the working world, existing professionals, we have educators, we have students. And so putting you on notice now, we're going to get to the question and answer section at the end. Think about questions as we go. Again, we want to get as much richness out of this as we can, and your voice is what we want to amplify, just like each of our panelists spend their time doing all they can to amplify Latinx voices. My name is David Marrero. I am one of the co-leads at Splunk for the Somos community. I also spend my time in corporate strategy. And as we go through, if we could go to the agenda, that'd be great. Perfect. So we'll start off, we'll do a quick 2-minute Splunk overview. Many of you may have not heard of who Splunk is, what we do. So quickly, just level set on that front. You hear the word Splunk. I don't want there to be confusion, so we'll get started there. One of our amazing Somos members, Jonathan's going to go through the history of Cinco de Mayo, give context, and remind people what today is about, right, being the 5th of May. You're going to get a chance to meet the panelists. We have an amazing, amazing set of panelists. And then we're going to spend that time on Q&A, right, really hearing your voices and making sure we get as deep and as much color out of what you're looking to get out of our time together. All right. So a little bit about Splunk. So Splunk is an enterprise software company. 92% of the Fortune 100 use Splunk. We have 6,000 plus employees. Just under 1% of that is in the Latinx community. That's what we spend a lot of our time trying to drive towards that change, right? And then also focus from a Somos perspective as an ERG. How do we then also promote advancement for that population that we have, right? Increase the numbers, and then how do we move folks forward as we advance in our career, and as Latinos are becoming more and more of the growing, or the fastest growing population, within the United States. We need to be in these roles as well, driving change. We have 600 plus patents for the engineers out there. That's a big part of our culture, R&D, being innovative, but then also, making sure that it's patented and supported. And, customers, we have 20,000 plus customers, but as any of the big names that are out there, the Nikes, the PayPals, they use Splunk, Zoom, to drive support for what they do as a business. Next slide. Awesome. So I talked a little bit about Nike, PayPal, right? So, think of Splunk as all of the data that it's generated, right? From machines, from your mobile devices, from every time you use a computer. We're the company that you're able to take that data and do things with it. Right. So what you do with it, those are all of the different areas where we drive value. But the core focuses at our inception were around IT ops, security, right? And then, as I mentioned, IoT and business analytics is where the company has evolved over the course of the last decade to be more and more impactful on what do you do with your data? How do you get value out of it? And then how do you run your company more effectively? Right. So enough about Splunk. Sorry. Pause for a quick sec. So within the Somos community, as we said, we've been growing tremendously. Splunk has 6,000 employees now, but 2 years ago, we had about 3,500 employees. So you look at that amount of growth that's happened. So as we're growing, the need for our community to be able to be brought together, to become more united, right? Somos is, right, we are, right? Splunk, right? Somos unidos, somos familia, right? That's the core. So you're going to hear from some of the members of our community on their Splunk journey.
Yo soy Latina.
I am a brown-colored Mexican-American woman.
Mexican-American.
Orgullosamente boricua.
Y yo soy puertorriqueña.
Sou cidadão do Brasil e los Estados Unidos.
adventurer, an explorer.
I am closing the opportunity divide.
I'm a grandma to 5 grandchildren and 1 on the way.
And I'm a plant mom.
I am a competition ballroom dancer.
English is both my first and third language. I was born here and then I moved to Mexico where I learned Spanish, thankfully. But I also forgot all of the English that I had learned from the years prior.
From where I grew up, I'm the only person to choose a career in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
I am the first person in my family to have graduated from college, and I have an MBA.
Yo soy la primera persona en mi familia para graduarse el liceo y la universidad.
I don't speak Spanish very well.
I'm really proud of being in Folklorico for 6 years professionally. It introduced me to a part of Mexican culture that I would have otherwise been unaware of.
I have 2 daughters with type 1 diabetes. I'm an advocate for the Juvenile Diabetes Association.
I am a technical support account manager here at Splunk.
I am a technology compliance analyst.
I work as a technical support account manager.
I'm a change manager at Splunk.
We are Somos.
Somos.
And I am a million data points.
I am a million data points.
I am a million data points.
And I created this video. I am a million data points.
Awesome. So as you'll see, one of the big things at Splunk is that million data points, right? We're a data company. We help people understand their data, but we're all complex. We're all these million data points are in ourselves. And so that's the focus of what we do, right? You saw Jonathan, who will speak next and talk a little bit about Cinco de Mayo, repping his Mexican flag, right? I represent the Boricuas. That's the last time you'll hear it for the next 2 minutes. Originally from Miami, right? I went to Stanford as an undergrad. I got an MBA. Those are some of my million data points. I'm a father, right? So as you hear the panelists, as we get into it, you're going to hear their million data points and think about your own, right? Because as you explore what the future looks like for you, how Latinx communities can be more impactful in tech and beyond, understanding our million data points and how those define who we are and drive what's possible. That's what it's all about. So with that said, I want to, we could do this all day. I want to introduce Jonathan. Again, he was repping the amazing dance moves as well as the Mexican flag in his video. He hails from Dallas currently, but he's going to talk a little bit about the history of Cinco de Mayo.
Appreciate it, David. Thanks for the introduction. My name's Jonathan, and I prepared for you the history of Cinco de Mayo in 5 minutos. So what have I told you? It's been celebrated here in America for over 150 years. It was first celebrated in 1863 in Southern California, 1 year after the victory at Puebla. There was a huge Mexican population due to the countries just splitting in 1847 and also the ongoing California gold rush that started in 1848. So the French supported a Southern victory because of the cheap cotton that they produced, and the Battle of Puebla was a really huge loss to them and drove their momentum away from that plan. So if the French had not been able to continue with their plan, would the turnout between the US been different? Would the Confederacy might have won? I encourage you to look more into it. All right, so the Chicano resurrection, through self-sacrifice, a commitment to nonviolence and their spirituality, Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta changed a nation. Together, they founded the farm worker movement. They fought against agribusiness, and they organized thousands of laborers so they can earn a living wage and have just working conditions. So this was very much a David versus Goliath battle, similar to the odds that the Mexicans faced at the Battle of Puebla. So whenever they were victorious, they adopted Cinco de Mayo as it reflected a major turning point for their rights as Hispanic people in America. All right, so why is Cinco de Mayo such a big drinking holiday like it is today? Well, agribusinesses weren't the only target of the Chicano rights activists in the 60s. Turns out that Coors and other major companies were also big offenders to our workers. We actually boycotted Coors. as reports surfaced of mistreatment of plant workers. And it wasn't until after a really large donation from Coors to LULAC and the National Council of La Raza did we lift this ban. So we obviously had a bad taste in our mouth from Coors. So what they did was they adopted Cinco de Mayo as their day to try to drive alcohol sales and to try to gain the affection of the Mexican people, and it worked. So what other major beer brands and liquor brands ended up doing was donating lots of money to LULAC and the NCLR, and they do that yearly now. So the alcohol industry is a big sponsor of Mexican culture. So that's why you see the big push for alcoholism in Cinco de Mayo. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks, Jonathan. All right, let's get down to the fun. Again, this is, the next 30 minutes will be about just amazing leaders in the Latinx community that in their own various ways are doing what they can to amplify the voices within our community, to provide opportunity, to drive inclusion. And I think as we go, so many times, I mentioned in the intro, right, the focus is, okay, we are here today, great. Now we know where we are and we have a current snapshot and the current point in time, but how do we get here, right? So many times understanding your history, understanding that data that's come before is what then lets you drive towards the future and make sure that we're, we have a seat at the table, that we're driving the direction of, right, the future of Latinx in tech. And so with that, so just high level, and so we'll stay here on all the panelists, but you're going to hear from, a leader who spent almost a decade as the mayor of San Jose and has been in public service for, over 30 years. You're going to hear from pair founders that are transforming media and amplifying Latino voices through positive content, podcasts, empowerment programs, and more. And then amazingly, right, you're going to hear from two Latinas, right, that are also mothers and that are doing what they can to absolutely shatter, right, the myth that Latina mothers and Latinas in general cannot do it all and cannot balance. It's a challenge, but you'll hear, how they've been able to make the impact they have and raise a family as well. All right. So next slide. So first, one of those amazing Latinas, we have Michelle Rodriguez. She's a senior manager in diversity, inclusion, and belonging at LinkedIn. She, again, all of these panelists have great educations, great backgrounds, but she's a proud daughter of Salvadorian and Mexican immigrants. And so we'll dig into how her time at LinkedIn, how she's helping drive, that progression and that inclusion. Next slide. The other amazing Latina, where you have Adriana Flores Ragade. So she is the founder of the Latinx America podcast. She also is driving, and historically has driven at Univision and other places, social impact, has 2 master's degrees, and is thriving in trying to do what she can to make sure that the voices of the amazing people in our community are amplified, are heard, and can be seen by others that look like us and come from our backgrounds. Ron Gonzalez, as I mentioned, former mayor of San Jose, spent time first as a city council member, then as a county supervisor, also spent time at HP, and is extremely impactful with the with nonprofit work in the Valley, as well as trying to give access and education opportunities to the next generation. Next. And then Alex Ontiveros. So Alex is the CEO of Silicon Valley Latino. Again, focuses on how can media and agency, how can we build positive views, positive understanding of the amazing contributions that members of our community are doing. All right. With that said, let's kick it off. If we could leave it on the, yeah, just take off. Perfect. So as we said, we want to spend our time today looking at, where Latinx in tech has been, and then where is it going? And so, Ron, starting with you, as we've looked at, the last 30 years, it'd be great to have your point of view as to how you've seen a change from where Latinx in tech has been leading up to, and then, through your time as the mayor of San Jose and beyond.
Well, thank you very much, David, and congratulations and thanks to all the panelists who are joining us today, as well as your audience. Very, very large group of people out there in the world looking at this, and certainly look forward to answering any questions that you have. So I guess it's only appropriate you go to the old man in the house first, and I'm very proud of the fact that this Sunday, May the 9th, I will be celebrating my 70th birthday. So I do have a little history. I won't go through all 70 years, but maybe just give you a snapshot of the incredible views, spectacles, sites, events, happenings that I've seen throughout my long life here in Silicon Valley, or what we used to call the Valley of Heart's Delight. So my family moved from San Francisco, where I was born, in 1954 to Sunnyvale, where I was raised for all of my childhood. And of course, in 1954, this valley was very different. Its primary industry was agriculture. It was slim pickings for jobs. And of course, the population reflected an agricultural community. So from 1954 to 2021, I've seen this valley go through many, many generations, iterations, downfalls, economic recoveries. And as those of us who have lived in this valley know, we always have this ability to bounce back, no matter how difficult the situation has been. And we certainly hope that'll be the case post-COVID-19. I do have my concerns, major concerns, about the impact of COVID-19 on our Latino community and our ability to rebound. It has impacted us tremendously. Over 50% of the deaths just here in Santa Clara County have been Latino, and we only represent about 27% of the population. So it's literally twice our percentage of the population that we've lost in the COVID-19 pandemic. So as I mentioned early in my years, this valley was all agriculture. And I would say the big change happened in the mid-1950s when Lockheed Missiles and Space Division was located in Sunnyvale. And from there on, I just remember grow, building, building, building. It just never stopped. And initially, that company and all of the companies that fed off of Lockheed, participated and benefited a great deal by the nation's race to get to the moon and to return, to send a man to the moon and return him safely to the Earth. And by the way, that second part's the most important part, by the way, getting them back here. But many industries benefited from that big boom. But once we landed a man on the moon and brought him back, the federal spending for that program really shrunk. So that industry had to recreate itself, and very timely came along the Vietnam War. And many of the very advanced weapons systems that you now see in place in various wars and conflicts around the world were created, at Lockheed and many other companies that benefited from the Vietnam War. And so we've seen that early influx of engineers that kind of retooled themselves from the space program to weapons programs. And then when the Vietnam War ended, of course, the funding for that changed a great deal. So that's pretty much when we started to see a major shift over technology to the technology industry. And companies like Hewlett-Packard and Apple and all these others came on to the forefront. And I would say when I first got involved in high tech at Hewlett-Packard in the late 1970s, I was very excited about working in high tech. Because at that time, companies like Hewlett-Packard and many others here in Silicon Valley not only manufactured our own products, we did that right here in Silicon Valley. So we really had a career ladder. I remember as an HR person hiring as many as 100 high school graduates a month to work on our manufacturing lines. And at the time, many of them did not have college degrees. It was not required. But they worked on our manufacturing lines. They took advantage of our college tuition reimbursement programs. They went on, got AA degrees, bachelor degrees, and they actually became engineers. So it really was a ladder with many steps. Well, the industry changed, as we all know, and the world changed and the world economy changed, and many of these companies then began to offshore their jobs. So that first couple steps of that career ladder were pretty much chopped off. And I would venture to say that if you went back and looked at the data, that's when we really took a hit in terms of less Latinos in high tech, because many of the Latinos who were in high tech in those days were in the manufacturing areas. So since that time, the industry has been trying to recover. Quite frankly, I think they've been asleep for the most part, and I say that as someone who worked in the industry. And now they're trying to get beyond the rhetoric to the action. And I think this has been a big challenge for them. I don't really see any companies that stand out, in my opinion, as the forerunners, the examples, because even the best of them are like 6-7% Latino population in an area where we represent about 30% of the total population. So a lot of progress yet to be gained. And then the other thing that I'll mention, just because of my public sector background, I would say, you know, I left the mayor's office after 2 successful terms in 2006, so that's 15 years ago. But I would say the biggest challenge for government, and we've seen it with the pandemic, is the ability to respond to constituents who want results yesterday. You know, I as a simple example, I ordered something on Amazon, it never showed up. I called them, you know, I got a hold of Amazon through their chat room. They sent another package. I mean, literally within 30 minutes, I was satisfied. Well, democracy doesn't work that way. Democracy is difficult. And I think one of the challenges that we're going to face this century is how does our government, how does democracy thrive in an industry where all of you, you know, want whatever government service you're calling City Hall about, and you're complete to be delivered that day. That's just going to be one of the biggest challenges of government. And then I think the biggest challenge for us here as a Latino community is the high price of housing. We have seen, you know, if you look at our website, the Hispanic Foundation of Silicon Valley, we did the latest report card we did was the 2018 Silicon Valley Latino report card, following the 2011 report card. In 2011, Latinos represented the second largest population group in the Valley, second only to Caucasians. In 2018, just a mere 7 years later, we slipped to the third population group. And that was directly related to the cost of housing. And that's why at our foundation, we're so focused on getting as many of our young people through college and out the door with the STEM degree so that they can afford to live here in the future. So those are some of the, you know, kinds of changes I've seen, and I'm sure I'll see many, many more in how many years I have left beyond 70. But thanks again for inviting me here to be with you today. And happy Cinco de Mayo.
Outstanding. Thanks, Ron. And you know, I think that we'll spend a little bit more time on the Hispanic Foundation of Silicon Valley later as we talk about the future and how we can help drive more and more access and more opportunity. Alex, you know, as you look, you know, you spend, you know, with your company, you spend a great amount of time profiling great work that's being done, leaders within our community. But you know, would love to hear a little bit of your thoughts on how we've gotten here, right? Up until the 2010, right? What did the Latinx community, how did it operate in tech, and what has been some of that historical context?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. Big props to you guys at Splunk and Somos. These are the conversations that we need to have, and we need to have them on a regular, ongoing basis, not just, you know, during special Latinx or Latino historical times, right? So thank you again for inviting me, and thank you for putting this together. I'm here from our Silicon Valley Latino Creative Agency studios. They're doing some renovation in the building, so there's some banging that happens every once in a while. So I apologize for the loud noise that's happening. But so yeah, to give you a little bit of history from my perspective and how I recall or I know how some of this history happened. I'm going to talk about the PMAA for a little bit, which was the Personnel Management Association of Aztlán. And they're a group that was founded in 1972 in the Los Angeles area. And it was basically the same conversation that we're having now. Why aren't Latinos or more Latinos being hired in, you know, corporate settings or technology companies and what have you, right? So this group of HR professionals, Latino HR professionals, decided to form an association, and their mission was to help these companies identify Latino talent. So they would ask for the job recs from the whatever companies they were working or had relationships with, and then they would help promote those job recs within the community. And slowly they started to help Latinos get into companies like, especially down in Southern California, like Boeing and other big employers down there. Eventually they grew to be large enough to have several chapters throughout California. They had a Silicon Valley chapter, San Francisco, Sacramento, and San Diego, and I believe there was also an Orange County chapter. I was involved with that organization from the mid '90s to the end. 2001 is when I was one of the last president for that association, and we made a pivot. We took that association from being an HR focused association to being an all-inclusive association, and so we opened it up to have professionals from all backgrounds and all types of industries to participate. And that organization was called CHISPA, the California Hispanic Professional Association. And it basically carried on the same tenets that PMA had, the same principles, the same mission, just to help promote Latinos and help them with finding opportunities with whatever companies we had relationships with, right? And professional development and a lot of that. That organization, CHISPA, we basically shut it down at the end of 2009. And shortly after, we launched Silicon Valley Latino, which is, you know, what we primarily do now. And that's a quick snippet of the history. One of the things that I do want to point out is that a lot of these folks that were involved in the PMAA were some of the people that helped what we call ERGs now, form with various companies. Back then, they were called Hispanic Employee Associations. And yeah, that's some of the history there. I know that you got more questions, so I don't want to hog up too much of the time, but thank you for the opportunity, and happy Cinco de Mayo, everybody.
Definitely. A quick follow-up for you, Alex. You know, as we kind of bridge into the more recent past, you know, how did you see from a Latino to Latina, right? You know, male versus female employment in the workforce historically? How did you see that history early on, right? Was it, you know, what was that percentage? Were there Latinas in the workforce? And then, you know, as we've approached the 2000s, right, how have we started to see some of that shift? Just, you know, maybe in 60 seconds.
Yeah, you know, I don't have any specific numbers, but one of the things that I do see and have seen, and it's a wonderful observance, is that there are so many Latina groups that are there to support Latinas, right? And because of those groups, they are able to build this network of support, right? And then they are able to really be there for each other in ways of making introductions, connections, professional development type opportunities through the different organizations that they lead. And you know, Latinas in STEM is someone that comes to mind. Latinas in Tech, Silicon Valley's Latina Coalition of Silicon Valley is another one. They're not all in tech, but there's a lot of groups of women focus groups that are really there to support each other. So if you're a Latina and you haven't plugged in, I definitely encourage any Latinas that want to plug into some of these groups, because they're very helpful, and I'm sure it'll be very rewarding in both ways, professionally and personally, for them to participate in.
Definitely. No, I think is, you know, within our community, right, support and being able to have community that you can lean on and talk to, right, then opens up the opportunities of what can I do and how can I get there, right? So I think these communities I can definitely see as being a great bridge as to where what has driven, you know, the increase in Latinas over, right, more recent years. But for some perspective on that, you know, Michelle and Adriana, starting with you, Michelle, you know, as you look at, you since you graduated from Santa Clara, Michelle, and have transitioned to the working world, what have you experienced from, the last decade of Latinx members in tech in Silicon Valley?
Yeah, it's a huge question. And I come from a practitioner in the diversity and inclusion field. So I'm currently on the diversity, inclusion, and belonging team at LinkedIn. And I would say even in this field, even as we're talking about how we're talking about this topic within tech, it's evolved drastically. I would say even in the last 5 to 6 years. And I think the change has been really welcomed, and it's really fulfilled me, just as a woman of color in this space as well. I think the conversation used to be more on representation and hiring, which is great. It's always something that you need to keep top of mind, but solely on that. I think when we think about decades ago, there were a lot of programs, there were a lot of efforts of perhaps, fixing or up-leveling Latinos, or thinking that there's something that we need in terms of professional development. We lack nothing as a community. And I think that the evolution of the conversation when we think about what this community needs is going back and looking at the environment. How are we preparing our colleagues, our managers, our leaders to create these environments that we need in order for Latinos to thrive? And so I think that the conversation has been more holistic from an organization standpoint, and thinking not only about hiring and retention, or not just about hiring and representation, but about retention in the environment, and looking at that all together, which has been super important for me in my work. So I think that the opportunities are tremendous, but I think that, like Ron was saying before, we have a long way to go. And I think the other thing is, people are starting to understand something that we all know, that our community is not a monolith. And so when we're thinking about recruiting, retention, understanding there's nuances. We are an ethnicity, not a race. Every region of the United States has different needs, different populations around Latinos. So this really perhaps needs to be a more regionalized strategy, and looking at the nuances when we're talking about retention of our community.
That's great. I think that shift from, we need pipeline, and we need more people in the door to be able to increase percentages, versus we need to be able to not only bring in this amazing talent that's out there and is ready and is waiting, but we also need to be able to support them and advance them, and provide resources that will make them successful, given kind of the unique backgrounds that we all provide, not just for each other, but then also for the companies that we work for, represent, or that we own. So I think that's an amazing shift, right? As you look at, where we were in the earlier days of, let's just get more Latinos to be in tech or with engineering backgrounds, et cetera. But then now, where it's about, okay, we're starting to make progress. We're nowhere near where we need to be, but let's now get more depth, and let's make a bigger impact, and let's make sure that the folks that are there, are empowered to be as impactful as they can be, which I think that's amazing. Adriana.
Sure.
We're Diverse Creators, Latinx America podcast, your time at Univision, so much, but how have you viewed the last decade plus of Latinx in tech?
I'm going to give you a personal perspective, and I'm also going to give you a professional experience. So when I came here about 20 years ago, Silicon Valley, it was not what it is today in terms of the number of Latinos that I'm seeing. So I'm seeing a lot more role models, a lot more representation in terms of founders, more people in VC. Back in the day, we didn't have like the social capital that we're building right now. There are more resources, so there are more organizations that are out there. I know Alex mentioned some. I know Tequeria. I don't know if we have any Tequeria members here, but Tequeria has been like instrumental in kind of developing young people and building community. Latinas in Tech. We have the Capar Center. We now have different summits that are happening, like the like Frank Carvajal's Silicon Valley Latino Leadership Summit, but LTX Fest. So we have a lot more than we did like 20 years ago. One of the things though, and the reason why I launched the podcast is because we were focusing a lot on like recruitment and creating this pipeline, and you had kids that you could go into tech but didn't really know how to. So through stories of founders and people in tech and now investors, I'm trying to change that kind of narrative so people understand like it's not a linear path for everyone. And I'm also seeing a lot more success in our community. I remember interviewing Richie, who the CEO of Phoenix, when he had not even had round one in funding. He was launching a fintech company. Now he has $96 million that have been invested in his company. So his company is doing really well. Same thing with like Maria Salamanca, who was an associate and is now a partner on Shackle Ventures. Yomaira Herrera is just announced today that she is also a partner at Reach Capital. So looking at all of this like stories and looking at how people went from point A to point B and their trajectory, but also the inspirational stories, because many of them, went through what we've all gone through. We're like children of immigrants. We learned English when we got here. So there are different kind of story paths. So that was like the passion behind me kind of building the podcast. And at the time that I launched my podcast, there were only 2 podcasts with the name Latinx on it. Now we have a lot, which is good. And that's where We Are Diverse Creators kind of came from, because I want to make sure that we have more people kind of sharing our stories, sharing our journeys, and then really facilitating connections. Because at the end of the day, that's what I'm seeing that is making a difference, building that social capital. So if you know that someone is doing launching a company or doing a venture, we need more Latinos as advisors for startups. We need more Latinos as investors, not just like investors, but also like working at the VCs, because that's where the money. That's how the money share. So I just feel like I've seen a bit more in terms of social capital, and I think that's what's gonna help us get to the next step. So that's a little bit of.
No, that's outstanding. And I think being able to see those individuals in these different roles that we weren't traditionally in then makes it easier for folks to understand, how do I get there, right? What is a model that I can replicate? And Ron, earlier you brought up COVID. It's the impact on housing. I think it's obviously, right, when we talk about being connected, is the least connected we've probably been, right, in all of our lives. I'd love to spend, and go to each of you directly, but how do you see COVID impacting the movement that we're going to go through into the future? Let's start with you, Ron, then Alex, then Michelle, then Adriana.
Okay, thank you, David. Well, I mentioned before the impact around, unfortunately, the death toll, but there's another impact that probably is just as important, and that's the impact on our students. The Hispanic Foundation of Silicon Valley, we spend about 80% of our time, as I mentioned before, trying to work with as many Latinx students as we can, both in Santa Clara and San Mateo counties. We serve about 2,000 families and their children each year. And we work with students from the 3rd grade up through middle school, high school, and then to and through college and out the door to hopefully be employed at places like Splunk and many of the other companies that are probably watching in on this telecast today. But we unfortunately, when the shelter in place went into effect last March of 2020, we saw a tremendous hit for our students. These are students that we work with primarily in after-school programs, Saturday mornings, and certainly during the summertime. And unfortunately, many of you may have heard of the phrase summer learning loss, and that is the learning loss that takes place with low-income minority students every summer because their parents can't send them to various science camps and math camps and those types of things. So every minority, underserved, low-income student loses a certain percentage of the knowledge they gained in the previous school year. Well, we believe, based on our working with Latino students throughout Silicon Valley, that summer learning loss last year began on March the 18th, because our students tend to go to low-income, underserved school districts, and those are the very same school districts throughout the region who were the last to respond to long-distance virtual learning. We had many students we were working with that were getting no virtual learning services from their schools 8 to 10 weeks into the pandemic. And so they are way behind. As all these schools start to go back into in-person teaching and in-person classrooms, we estimate that our students, our Latinx students, will be anywhere from 12 to 18 months behind other students at wealthier, better served schools. That's an impact that's going to last, unfortunately, an entire generation. So we are doubling down our efforts. We're really pressing our funders to try to step up their game. And you know, while we all supported the Black Lives Matter movement last year and the continuing discussion around that, we believe our foundation, as the only Hispanic-led and Hispanic-managed public foundation in Silicon Valley, we have to be the ones, quite frankly, that educate the general public and educate business leaders that when you talk about the Black Lives Matter movement in Silicon Valley, you better start including the Latino community, because we are the community of the largest population with the largest need. And we, quite frankly, have stepped up our game. And I joke that at the end of the week, my finger is so tired of poking people in the ribs. But that's got to be our mission this year, in the next 5 years at least, because we've got to step up the investment, whether it's philanthropic or business or banking, into our community. We've settled for far too less than what we should be getting for far too long. So that's kind of where I'm thinking that the COVID-19 crisis has hit, and where we have to economically and educationally respond in the next 12 months too.
Got it. Yeah, and as we and for those attending, we're gonna go through till noon Pacific time, but the Q&A, we're gonna stretch over that. So anybody who can stay with us, we'll get started before noon, but we'll make sure that there's enough time after for anybody who wants to ask additional questions. All right. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Alex.
David, I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah,
I was so in tune with Ron's response that I kind of lost what the question.
Fully. Yeah. So what would one, for the sake of time, what would one area of significant impact that you see from COVID on our community? What would one area be as we look towards the future and what's ahead?
Well, I think a lot of what Ron said is true. I mean, the impact has been devastating to our community. One of the things that I'd actually like to touch on is I love the way that our community showed up, the way that we've responded. There are so many individuals and organizations that have stepped up in such a phenomenal way, and it really speaks to the strength of who we are, how resilient we are, how innovative we can be, and as a community, how we can come and pull together. There's so many different examples. One of them that I'm thinking of right now immediately is, Darlene Tennis and her migrant farm worker, or the farm worker caravans that she and other leaders have led for several months now. There's also ALAS, which is an organization in Half Moon Bay that's done a tremendous job looking out for the farm workers in so many ways, including making sure that they got vaccinations early on. And ALAS stands for Ayudando Latinos a Soñar. They're out of Half Moon Bay. I encourage everybody to look them up. And of course, there's so many things that the Latino Community Foundation out of San Francisco has done. And to piggyback on Ron's point is that a lot of these organizations, a lot of these efforts, although many of them came up or were developed organically, to be able to sustain this type of work, there needs to be that support. So yeah, echoing on Ron's point, yeah, we need support for these organizations to continue to help in any which way that they can. Like Ron said, either philanthropic or whatever budgets that are allocated or can be, or we can get some monies or funding allocated toward these movements is incredibly important. So yeah, that's my perspective on it.
Got it. Perfect. Adriana, skipping ahead to you, on that same question, all right, as a mother, right, both you and Michelle are Latina mothers that are doing so much. I know that Latinas have been one of the most heavily impacted populations, right, throughout COVID, right, having to leave the workforce, as well as just the strains of raising kids in a pandemic and work and study from home society. But, would love your thoughts on how you see the impact of COVID on Latinas at large.
I know that COVID had an impact on Latinas, just in general. Women, just a lot of women left the workplace, and a lot of it had to do with like childcare issues. You all of a sudden became, I became, and I'll just use my personal example. I became the short-term cook. I became the school teacher. I became the activities guide person after school. So there's just a lot that came into place. For me, actually, with COVID, it was really important to think of how we were going to get through the pandemic as a family. And as you know, in the Latino community, familia is really, really important, but the burden ends up a lot on women. So, but as a content creator for me, I ended up producing a lot. That's actually when I launched the Latinx American Media, where I'm working with other podcasters so they can kind of launch their own voices under the Latinx American Media umbrella. So I was able to, because of the flexibility, because I actually had the kids at the house too, we were able to kind of somehow sink in and not use all the broadband. And I was able to just create a lot of content as well. I helped my daughter launch her podcast during the pandemic. So there were a lot of opportunities in terms of like familia. But I think as women start thinking about coming back to work, workplaces have to really think about like flexible work arrangements that are gonna support that, that nurturing environment that we created for our children, but will continue to allow us to be part of familia and also be part of the workplace. Also, in terms of hiring, all of us have different skill sets, and some of us, are transitioning not just into tech, but you're transitioning into different careers. So looking at skills-based hiring as opposed to really thinking about like, okay, this is the degree that you have, this is what you're going to do. So I think there still needs to be a lot done in terms of recruitment and retention. So looking at support systems and care systems for Latinas in the workplace would also be super helpful. But I think for some people, it was a blessing in disguise. I think for me, it was also because we were able to really focus on what was really important. And for me, familia has always been really important, but having my 8-year-old and my 11-year-old with me at all times as they're going through like their own transitions was really important. And having the flexibility of being a content creator was also a plus.
Love that. And I think, our ability, and it is very much how you're saying, to set the narrative as to what is needed in order for success to happen. I think speaking up, we love speaking up when it comes to, what nationality we might represent, right? But being able to do that from what need to be provided to us and following through on that, that's great. We're a lot of the questions that are coming in are around the future and what do we do, right? And we talked about that on the intros. How do we get ourselves from today through the future? So, if we're good with it, let's transition to question and answer, and we'll touch on, more of what's next through that. So, the first question that came in, so I'll quote it, right? I'm curious if any of you know other Latinx folks in tech that are non-traditional tech roles, such as I am. For example, I'm a clinical social worker and a previous public school administrator, right? So let's go to Michelle, coming from LinkedIn and having the exposure that you have to progression, careers, and advancement. What do you say to non-traditional backgrounds that want to be in tech and how to think about making that transition?
Yeah, I use myself as an example oftentimes. I was a sociology major, ethnic studies major in undergrad. I studied public administration. I accidentally fell into tech. And so I often talk about my accidental fall. Yes, there are many obvious engineers at LinkedIn, a lot of MBAs, but the way I talk about it with other folks, particularly those trying to break into certain size organizations, it's almost like we're mini societies. Like you need the lawyers, you need the content creators, you need the creatives, you need the HR folks. So you need a little bit of everything. And so I would say, don't let that deter you if that is something that you are interested in pursuing. The other thing that's happened now that we're talking about the impact of COVID and the pandemic is that LinkedIn has actually started doing a lot of efforts in terms of connecting people to employment on the platform and really approaching a skills-based look at how do you reinvent yourself. You know, if you find yourself where your industry has kind of come to a halt or your job has come to a halt, how do you reassess your skills-based? How do you learn what you need to learn on LinkedIn to get to your next play? So that's been a huge, huge reinvention that LinkedIn has been working with as well. But I would say, you know, the other tip I tell folks if they're really trying to break into tech is to always network, you know, find the community amongst ourselves, you know, somebody knows somebody who knows somebody, to try to get that internal referral, because internal referrals are the #1 way to get into a tech company when we're thinking about in comparison to just a cold application. So I always sort of welcome those connections. You know, at LinkedIn, we always say relationships matter. And I think that is something very natural for our communal culture to really take into account and really leverage the fact that we're small, but we're tight. So like, how do we help each other up into these roles as well?
And if I can add a little bit to that, there are plenty of people, if you check out the podcast, Latinx America podcast, you'll see that there are people that have transitioned from, you know, being an education person or a counselor into tech. There are different roles within a tech company. You need the lawyers, you need the HR, you need the sales, you need the people org, or human resources, I guess, people org. So you have a lot of different roles within the tech space that are not technical in nature. Although we do need more people, more Latinx in tech and on the technical side, there are other opportunities there, and networking and connecting with people. One of my somebody that I had on the podcast was able to get a job at Pandora because of those connections that we made. So networking relationships do matter, Michelle. I agree with you.
Yeah, and I think in Adriana and Alex, you guys mentioned some really powerful organizations that are, you know, at a more granular level doing work to try and create sub-communities to make it even more accessible, which I think, you know, so everybody on the call, right, definitely look up as many of those organizations as you can if you want to gain access to, you know, great people that want to help and resources. You know, that's a great place to start. Love it. Next question coming in is, you know, what can your companies do to encourage or do to continue encouraging and supporting students despite the COVID setbacks and get them through the door? You know, Ron, you talked a little bit about, you know, what the Hispanic Foundation of Silicon Valley is doing. You know, what are some other ways that that companies can better empower students to get back on the right track here coming out of COVID?
Well, I talked earlier about my disappointment in the industry I came from in terms of its lack of real progress towards some of the real diversity numbers that should have been achieved by now. But those who are industry, you can be our internal champions. You know, companies are used to people like me approaching them with our handout, trying to get money to invest into the Latino community. But if they hear from people like you, people who work for them, who are on their payroll, and you start to advocate for some of the organizations that I've seen pop up in the chat room, they're going to start to listen. So I believe in the area of diversity and inclusion. My favorite quote is, "Your actions are so loud, I can't hear what you're saying." And I think we're still in that period of time where we love to have panel discussions and workshops. I say cancel all of those, just start writing checks. Just start distributing funds to organizations that can help you bring in employees into your workforce. And of course, the foundation, we have over close to 400 students we've supported with scholarships up to $10,000 per year, up to 3 years, all of them majoring in STEM degrees, all of them looking for summer internships. So if your company has a summer internship program, you should be connecting with us, because we have computer science majors, electrical engineering majors, hardware engineers. We have all kinds of people that should be in the funnel. So we no longer accept the excuse that companies have used for far too long, that there are not enough Latinos in the funnel. First of all, many companies do not just hire engineers. They hire people in finance, they hire people in marketing, they hire people in administration. And even in those departments, we are very seldom more than 2 to 3%. As individuals, each of you should look at mentoring some college student. In our scholarship program, 80% of the students are first generation. They can't call home and talk to mom and dad if they run into a problem at college, because mom and dad didn't go to college. Just like just my personal experience, and I suspect many of your own personal experiences where you were the first in your family to go to college. So our Conexiones program, which connects our scholarship recipients with professionals just like you out in high tech, men and women, matched up with men and women in college, is one of the best programs. Take on the individual responsibility. Help one student. If all of us just help one student, either financially and or through mentorship, I think we'll start to see some real progress in the next 5 to 10 years.
I love that. With the name of the game being about accountability, Michelle, Adriana, Alex, do either of you have a view on what companies need to be able to do to help support our students?
I want to chime in with something. There's been, it's not related to this part of the question, but there's been conversations about like how there's so many other opportunities in different departments, marketing, HR, finance, what have you, right? But I just want to also point out that Latinos are also have had a very successful track record in the tech departments, right? Whether it's been in security, whether it's been in information, whether it's been whatever. I mean, I just want to point out that most recently we had 3 CIOs at one of the some of the bigger companies around. The CIO at Cisco, formerly Guillermo Diaz, was the CIO at Cisco. Timothy Campos was the CIO at Facebook. Ramon Baez was the CIO at HP. And then if you want to look at, how far can we make it as Latinos leading organizations, we have HPE and Antonio Neri leading that organization, right? So before going on to answering the other part of the question, I just wanted to make sure that people understand that, yeah, there's all these opportunities that, or at companies that are beyond the technical, but even in the technical spaces, we have had success. So I just wanted to make that point. In terms of, how do we help? What are some of the ways? I love what Ron said. Have some of the folks that are within the ERGs participate in the programs that are out there. There are so many different organizations. And again, like Adriana mentioned, Tequeria is another great organization that's out there. And there's so many where you can plug in and participate as a mentor or as a panelist, because they also have panel discussions and shared journeys. We at Silicon Valley Latino do the same thing. And so it's about, for us, it's about how do we demonstrate to these youth that there's so many of us in different roles at different companies that have been able to successfully land at a company, and not just land and be in that role, but succeed in that role. And I think our youth really need to see that as well.
I love that. Go ahead, Adriana.
I just said I added some things to the chat.
Okay. Perfect. And we're at time, but we're going to go for another 10 minutes here. So so anybody that needs to drop, please feel free. But anybody who wants to continue the conversation, we're going to keep it going. All right. So next question coming in, what advice do you have for young adults, right? On, who want to be in tech, but in light of the, ever evolving ecosystem, the traditional dependency on being in California or the Bay Area, which may now change as COVID is creating some distribution, but open to everyone. But what advice do you have for those young adults trying to figure out how to chart that path aside from connect with the community and engage more with the network?
If you don't mind, I can just do a quick. I think it's really important that you limit yourself by geography, you limit yourself by title, and also number of years of experience. One of the things that I've seen, and Michelle will probably can expand more on this because she knows more about recruiting, but is that sometimes we take ourselves out of the competition before we even get there, because we're like, oh no, they require 10 years of experience, or you have to have like, you have to know all these different languages. No, I think just putting your hat out there, putting your name out there, submitting the application, doing follow-up, making those connections with people. Like LinkedIn is perfect. It's a perfect place. I mean, you can cold LinkedIn someone, cold email someone. And if you're a student, if you're transitioning, the likelihood that they're going to reply to you is super, super, super high. So get yourself out there, get your resume ready, have someone review it. There are organizations like Wall Breakers. Andrea Gondovan has been doing this for a while with Wall Breakers, and they're placing young grads. Even if you don't have the technical skills and you want to go into tech, there are boot camps. So look at the different resources that are out there. Put yourself out there, begin applying, look at the job applications that are out there, and try to match some of the skills that you have that could be transferable with the job apps that are out there. But Michelle, do you want to go?
+1, as we say at LinkedIn, +1, everything that Adriana just said. In addition, I think that students need to take advantage of their student time. So, like Adriana said, no one will ever say like, no, I don't have time for that informational interview. At least in all these years, I have yet to hear a rejection for a student requesting an informational interview. But, come prepared, understand what is it that you want to learn from that person. Understand every journey is so unique. But what can you take from that person's journey to influence, how your next step is going to be? A lot of times people come looking to me sort of like for a blueprint of like, maybe if I just follow Michelle's path, I'll end up to where, and I'm always like, no, because my path is like this. And so it was a long, windy road, but find your windy road and be okay with that. There's no blueprint for a lot of these things. And the other thing is to not undermine any of the experience that we have, particularly as young folks that are perhaps children of immigrants that, helped with their parents' business or helped their parents or their family work in any type of way. Caretaking is a job, helping with the family business is a job. Trying to really show the value of the skills that you bring, the resilience that you bring is huge. And so I think a lot of this is wrapped up into something I tell mentees is to understand when to turn up and down the volume of that humility that we value in our culture. Sometimes, like Adriana said, we kind of put that humility factor a little too high, and it's like, who am I to, put myself out for that role, or who am I? It's like, no, you're everything, and so just remembering we need to control that dial and understand when to put it up and down.
No, I love that. And I think you guys were right on too, that, it's beyond just for young individuals or students that are trying to transition into this new career path, right? I mean, if you're looking to make a switch and you've been 20 years in another industry, it's the same principles, same type of activities that'll help support how do we identify what I can do and how do I get there, which I think is great. For the entire panel, a big part for us, right, is our culture, who we are, our, the familia component. As you look at this world, and we'll keep it in technology, but it can stretch beyond Ron, and we can even get into politics, of course, but how, as we move through our careers, how do we keep our culture and our values at the center of what we do when a lot of the forces around us are trying to drive us in other directions? Anybody have thoughts about that?
Well, I'll go first. Michelle mentioned this earlier, and I think she's right. I think along with the challenge of recruiting Latinx professionals into the workforce, I think the bigger, more difficult task is retention of those people. And I think this is definitely where our culture clashes with the predominantly Caucasian kind of frat boy culture of the industry. Because I hear from a lot of young Latinx professionals who have been in the industry for anywhere from 3 to 5 years who say, I just don't think this is for me. I don't go to work to have to be, it's not, work is not my friendships. Work is not my family. My friendships are pretty much outside of work. I mean, I can be friends with people at work, but it's not going to be my life. I don't, if If my job starts at 8 and ends at 5, I'm out of there at 5:05 because I got kids I got to take care of, I got family to relate to, whatever it is. So I think this is going to be one of the really interesting challenges, because I think we're one of the few minority groups that have that kind of basic need within our souls and our hearts and our upbringing. So I think that's going to be one of the challenges. However, I think the immersion, or I should say the acceleration of ERG groups should play a big role in that area. They should be the kind of the nesting places for Latino employees to go to, whether it's events or just in the cafeteria. Like we used to all get together in the same table in high school. Maybe that's what we're going to get to in tech. And then there'll be others who kind of come over and steal our tacos and trade for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. But the point is, we have to build within our community at each of these sites, these work sites, and build out from there. But I do think this is going to be one of the bigger challenges. How do you retain this workforce? And I think the other thing that hopefully we'll see is the immersion of more and more Latino entrepreneurs, so that we're joining their companies, whether they're led by Latinas or Latinos or both. Hopefully we'll have companies that are founded by our own community members that we can join, and hopefully those companies will have more welcoming culture, organizational cultures.
I love it. Any other views on, how do you navigate, maintaining our culture and being ourselves with all of these external factors that are involved in tech and beyond?
Yeah, I'd like to chime in on that. I think it's folks like yourselves, the people at Somos, at Splunk, basically, sharing that perspective that you carry and your experience and the challenges that we all have as we transition into tech type companies, right? Cultures are different from company to company, and I think as each ERG can share, this is where we're coming from, and I know that we're not monolithic, but I think there's a lot of common threads in terms of the culture that we all share, and I think if those perspectives and those conversations can be led with or gained with leadership, that's going to be important, especially when there's so many organizations now talking about belonging. It's like, and bringing your authentic self to work, right? So it's like having those conversations that are gonna help the organization really have something that's authentic and something that's gonna work for not only the employees in terms of their comfort level and wanting to be there and really feeling included, but also for the organization in the long term.
And if I could add in here, I love that. And I think what you said, Alex, is touching on how do we start changing some of the system that we're in. I really feel a greater responsibility as I've become a people manager, as I've become a leader in the organization, to not only just figure out the game and play it, but change the game for others coming up. And I don't think that enough of us are doing that as we are reaching the management ranks, as we're reaching the leadership ranks. My boss and I talk about this a lot, and there's nuances or subtle things that you can do that maybe is unlearning some of the things that we've grown up with. So for example, I make it really clear, I have sacred time in my day, every day, where I'm not going to be available. And I tell folks and I tell my teammates, that is my family time. Or, and I tell people, LinkedIn shouldn't be reaching you 24/7. You are a human being that has, important people that you need to take care of, your family, whatever. That's my way of staying true of like, familia is like the first thing. My children are everything, right? And I can still be successful in my career and be, a mom to an extent, a great mom, right? And the other thing is being really conscious that people have different needs, and we're in a time of reinvention. The whole face of work is different. At least in our companies, we're not commuting right now. We are, 24/7 online. And what does that mean in terms of when we do take time off, being more transparent on, I just need a mental health day. I am taking time off to take care of my children. I am taking time off. I'm about to take time off to take care of my mom after a major surgery, and being really transparent about that and having that just be okay is a part of unlearning all of this too.
And if I can just add, I think also understanding your needs as a professional and your needs as a person. So mental health, we talked about mental health before, but seeing a therapist is really important, not just if, we've all grown up with like parents saying, oh, solamente ves un terapista if you're loco or something. No, I think a lot of really successful people that I know and that I work with are seeing therapists to kind of take it up a notch, or to, process some things that they went through that helped them build resiliency, but that they need to process now. So think about those needs as well for your individual, so you can so you can bring your authentic self to work.
Awesome. This has been amazing. We'll wrap up on that note. For everybody again in attendance, again, as an ERG lead at Splunk, if you're an ERG lead, if you represent a foundation or have any program that you're working on, reach out, right? We want to be able to find the right way to help, right? Same with the other panelists. There's so much impact that we can make together, and it's just connecting the dots, and the hardest step is the first step, and then from there, right, the power of the comunidad starts to kick in, which is what we need to do more intentional unlocking of. So tremendous thank you on behalf of the Splunk Somos community, on behalf of Splunk at large, right? Michelle, Adriana, Alex, Ron, thank you for spending an hour plus of your time and being willing to share all the amazing impact that you're making.
Thank you. And check out Splunk, guys. They're doing some good stuff. I mean, like this. So check them out. Drop there, maybe.
Do it. Awesome. Thank you.